At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our Assistant Librarian and Curator at the Iowa Masonic Library and Museums, Brother William R. Krueger. He's past president of the Masonic Library and Museum Association. And closer to home, he's overseeing the periodical Index Rerum digitization project and is a key person in making Iowa Masonic Library research material available to the Masonic and non-Masonic world. Brethren, let's welcome William Krueger. We'll have a break about 10:15. We've got coffee and cookies and stuff up.
Thanks for welcoming me to the Iowa Conference on Masonic Education, the Midwest Conference, Masonic Education. I think this is the first time that I've addressed both or either bodies. And it's my pleasure to be here today to talk to you a little bit about the library and museum and what we're doing. What I wanted to do initially was to give you a background of the history of the library and museums, how we came about, why we came about. And to do that, I'm going to be using some of the program that I used at the Quarry Project about 6 months ago in September, I believe it was. And that's basically to talk about some of the collections policy because they address some of the things that I deal with on a regular basis and why we do them and why they were done initially. Some background of the library and museum here. The library itself was founded in 1845. Iowa achieved statehood in 1846, so we actually predate statehood by 1 year, the Grand Lodge by 2 years, since they were founded in 1844. The library itself was the outgrowth of an idea that our first Grand Secretary had. His name was T.S. Parvin. And see if I can, well, I'm going too fast here. I got it. Which way am I going? Okay. His first mission statement probably for the library dealt with why he wanted to create a library, and I think it kind of hits to the point I think that Sean was making that may have come out of some of the early Masonic writings about Masonic education. And you can see what his first mission statement indicated, that we believe that the only true method of disseminating Masonic light and knowledge and of having the principles of our order properly appreciated and practiced is to create an interest in the study of the same, as laid down in the constitutions of Masonry. And so that was the first mission statement to help guide the library. This was the suggestion that he had that was brought forth in 1845. His first suggestion is relative to the importance of founding a Grand Lodge library. When I first became a Mason in 1838, I immediately inquired for Masonic books in the hope of improving myself in Masonry, and was greatly disappointed in being able to find among a large circle of old and influential members in Cincinnati only a copy of Cross's chart and some 5 volumes of the Masonic Mirror of Boston, all of which I devoured and thus learned for the first time, among other things, of that mysterious person, Morgan. I feel that want to a still greater extent, and I am sure that the young and inquiring brethren of this jurisdiction must experience the same difficulty. So that was the initial idea behind the creation of a library and museum here, or a library at least. As you can see, it was adopted by T.S. Parvin. I'm going backwards here. Our current mission statement, which was developed in the mid-1990s, and it basically tries to encompass the same ideas I think that Parvin had. But you can see here the mission of the Iowa Masonic Library and Museums is the spreading of light of intelligence and truth into the dark places, dissipating ignorance and superstition, and in their place bringing enlightenment and goodwill to both Masons and non-Masons. We were established as a library in 1845. The initial allocation of $5 was used to buy 4 Masonic books. That improved over time. By the 1850s, 1860s, the volume count had risen to 4,000. The library in its early days was a very nomadic institution, stayed with Parvin while he traveled to different places around the state. Parvin was here initially, came to Iowa as the personal secretary to Robert Lucas, our first territorial governor, and the initial location for the state capital was in Burlington, and it moved later on to Iowa City. That's where Parvin spent a lot of his time. Besides being a Masonic librarian, he was also the first state librarian and had gone back to Cincinnati in the early days of territorial statehood and purchased the collection of what is now the Iowa Library. And I believe those volumes are still existing in Des Moines, the ones that he purchased back in the 1830s, early 1840s. So he was what I would say would be a Renaissance man. He was a lawyer, a teacher, educator. He kept some of the first weather reports of Iowa, so he was really into all of these things, and of course Masonry. Okay, the collections, of course, have been developed to satisfy the mission. The initial intent of the collections probably were Masonic only, and that's simply because the collection stayed with Parvin. They did not have a permanent location for the library. It moved around with Parvin as he moved to different locations. The collections then evolved when the library set on Cedar Rapids. They came to Cedar Rapids here in 1883, 1884. The first library was built. This is a picture of that library that you see on the screen there. That library was built here, as I said, in 1884. It was planned to, last for 100 years. Unfortunately, I think that building only stood for about 75 years before it was maxed out. But basically, the collections were developed initially as Masonic collections, but then it evolved with the growth here in Cedar Rapids. This library was the first public library in Cedar Rapids. I say public in quotation marks because we were not supported by public funds. It was supported by the Grand Lodge of Iowa, but it's always been open to the general public. Anybody can use our collections, really no questions asked. Sometimes we have to ask questions, but usually we allow people to peruse our collections and to check out materials. So again, the collections evolved with its location here in Cedar Rapids. So we were asked a question, we've always been asked a question like, why do we have a general collection, a large general non-Masonic collection here? And I think that goes back to the fact that we were the first public library in Cedar Rapids, and so they felt a need to develop a public sort of presence here that anybody could use. There are 5 major collections in the library. Our Masonic collection was developed initially, including periodicals and books. It includes a fraternal collection, those fraternal societies which are outside Masonry, including Oddfellows, Knights Templar, Knights of Pythias, the Grange, and so forth. We have a lot of those in our collection. We include an anti-Masonic collection. Parvin felt early on that there was a need to have an anti-Masonic collection. Going back to that statement that you saw earlier about the fact that was the first time he heard about Morgan was through some Masonic publication he read. He felt there was a need to keep up with the anti-Masons, to hear what they were talking about. What better way to know about your enemy than to read about what they're doing, and so forth. So we have a large anti-Masonic collection here. General non-Masonic collection, again, we were the first public library in Cedar Rapids. I mentioned that. The collection developed, we think, to meet the needs of the general public at that time period. Now, we've added to the general collection over time, but that's not our key main area of interest. As you can see, it's mostly couched in the humanities. Third area is our Iowa collection. T.S. Parvin donated his collection of Iowa materials in the late 1880s. This became the nucleus of that collection. I've talked about that already. He came to Iowa as a personal secretary to Robert Lucas. He served as secretary of the State Historical Society of Iowa. He helped set that area up. Our goal here with this Iowa collection is not to duplicate or replicate what the State Historical Society has. We're not trying to compete with them. But we have this Iowa collection that Parvin began, so we've added to that over time. We have, for instance, all the county histories in Iowa. We have a lot of the county plat maps. We have, a lot of the Civil War histories, unit histories of units from Iowa in the Civil War, things like that. So again, that's something we've continued to add. We do try to collect Iowa authors, so that kind of thing. We have a religious and philosophical collection. It's our fourth area that we try to collect in. This was again developed due to Freemasonry's belief in a supreme being. Includes information on most all religious beliefs and philosophies. So even some of the real fringe groups we have information about. It also includes the A.E. Waite book and documentary collection of Harold V.B. Voorhees. And those are all what we have of that. It's not the entire works of Waite, but it's the one that Voorhees acquired, and they're all signed first editions. About 1886, after the library had been here for a couple of years, Parvin was interested in developing what he called the archaeological collection of the museum, or the archaeological department of the museum. And he put out this publication entitled The Collector, and sent these out probably to various jurisdictions throughout the country, asking for items to donate to the library. And because of that, we have a museum now. So the museum basically was an extension of the library. Now, we've applied for federal funds in 2006, I applied for federal grant money to try to get someone here to survey the collection, to give us some recommendations on how we might be able to, preserve some of our artifacts. I think that time we were concerned about a big globe we had in our upstairs. And trying to describe the fact that we have a museum and a library that are together to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, I thought would have been a very, easy thing to do, because it's the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Well, we're a museum and a library. I thought that would go hand in hand. Well, they couldn't understand how the museum and the library kind of function together. Well, the one was an outgrowth of the other, and trying to explain that to, a federal grant reader is sometimes hard to do, and we didn't get the grant. So these are just an example of some of the things that were in that brochure entitled The Collector, things that Parvin wanted to add to the museum. Again, it was developed to illustrate three-dimensional objects. It then projected the Iowa Masonic Library as the first public museum in Cedar Rapids. We've been recognized as a pioneer museum in Iowa by the Iowa Museum Association. We keep accession records for both the library and museum. Those have been kept pretty religiously back even to the point when, when Parvin was here. So sometimes it's easy to go back and track things when they were acquired, when they came into the museum. Just an example of what I do. This is one of the first deed of gift agreement forms that was developed when Parvin was here. Basically, it's a document that states it's a transfer of property from one person to another. So that artifact, or that whatever it might be, is given to us by John Brown, from John Brown to the Grand Lodge of Iowa. It's no longer John Brown's property. It belongs now to the Grand Lodge of Iowa. So we have say over what happens to this. That way, there's, and the deed of gift agreement we have today reads like this, that we can do with the object what we want to with it, that we're not tied to any strings, that We're not necessarily tied to having it on an exhibit on a regular basis. We can change those things out if we want to. And if need be, we can get rid of that object if we feel it's outside of our area at that time, or we are no longer able to keep that object. We also have loans. We loan books out on a regular basis. We have policies on who can borrow books, length of loan period, and borrowing guidelines. Okay. Questions on that? Do you have questions about what I've covered so far? Yes, sir.
These documents, your deed or gift document and loan policy, is that available for us to, I don't want to say steal, but perhaps?
Sure. Right, yeah. I included those as packet items for the quarry project, and yeah, I'd be happy to just give me your name, and I'd be happy to send samples out to you. And I don't know if I can dig them up today. I probably could, but I've got too many things going on today.
No, I don't need them today.
Yeah. Just give me your name, address, or email address, and we can. I'm sure we can scan them and send them out to you, and be happy to share those with you. That's the one nice thing about cultural organizations. Cultural organizations often steal from other organizations. So, so that's what we've done. So, any other questions?
Bill, you might briefly mention our digital policy.
We do have a policy for digitizing collections, and we basically, that has to be approved by our Grand Secretary, Grand Librarian, or myself as the Assistant Librarian. We just don't allow anybody to bring cameras into the collections unless we know about it ahead of time. We need to know what you're photographing, why you're photographing those materials and items, and then there could be a charge for those materials as well. We have a policy on what we charge for various digitization projects. So we have our own digitization machine that we can digitize items, not like what Mark was talking about, 400 pages in a minute. We do them very carefully. Not saying Mark doesn't do that, but we try to do them as carefully as we can in a proper way. And so we have done several Prince Hall proceedings, and once we make copies, we put them in a PDF format, and then they're available for the individual, and then they may be available also eventually through our website. So, any questions about that? Okay. If not, one of the things that we've recently done is to digitize our index to our periodicals, something that was referred to as the index rerum. The index rerum probably would develop because the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature that came out probably in the early 1900s. It's basically a guide to everything that's in periodical literature. It's indexed to an article level. That index left out Masonic periodicals. So the Grand Lodge of Iowa decided that they were going to index Masonic periodicals in the collection of the Grand Lodge. So that's what was done. It started about 1905, and we were doing hard copies up until probably 2 years ago. And when we started the digitization project, now everything is done on computer. We computerize those, or digitize those records. We started with that in June of 2012, and or 2011, I think, June of 2011, and we just finished up this past year in December of 2013, I believe. So a little over 2 years it took us to do that project. Those items are indexed to the article level, and we were clued into this by, we had a Masonic meeting here in 2008, MLMA meeting, and one of the individuals who met here, or two individuals that met here were Jeff Croteau from the jurisdiction out in Massachusetts, the Scottish Rite, the Northern jurisdiction, and then Martin Cherry, who's a librarian at the Grand Lodge of England. And I was showing him around the library, and we came to the index rerum and pulled things out. I was telling him about it, and Martin was going, "This is a gold mine. You know what you have here? Nobody has done this anywhere in the world." And so we have indexed all the periodicals that we have in our collection, which is most of the periodicals that are in Masonry that are out there. So it's to the article level. We hired local individuals through a office, a firm called Office Team. They weren't necessarily clued into the proper way to catalog materials. They were just typing information in for us. The hardest part was trying to capture all the subject headings that are necessary for subject heading searches. The subject headings that we use in Freemasonry are sometimes different than subject headings that are used in the profane world through the Library of Congress. So I told them that, you know, if they came across an article that the subject heading wasn't very clear and what the title of the article was, just to leave that information blank, where for subject area. And I would try to, answer that question as best I could. And I would visit them on a regular basis and see how they were doing and if they had any questions. And of course, initially, they were like tons of questions I had to answer about how to do this project and so forth. So we got them work through that. But as far as subject headings go, we just told them just to leave blank if they couldn't answer that, very easily. I try to deal with some of the simple ones, but again, there's a lot out there that are still with blank. So if what I recommend to people is to do a keyword search for articles that they might be interested in looking at. For instance, we were looking at Denslow earlier today. So type in the word Denslow, Ray V, and you should come up with a whole slew of articles that Ray Denslow wrote or that are about Ray Denslow. Prince Hall. Type that in as a keyword search. You should come up with a whole slew of articles, again, that are about Prince Hall Masonry. And then you can click on the individual article. It'll tell you what periodical it's found in, the page number and volume number that is. Now, it's not a full article that you can read, but at least it's an index to where you might be able to find that. And if you can't find it, we would have it here because we did the indexing. So you just simply call us and ask us about it. So I'll demonstrate that now. We'll also transition from one database to another. We just got our new database in on Thursday, so we're transitioning from Spectrum, Winnebago Spectrum, to a program called Alexandria. So there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve where the data conversion has already taken place. Now we have to input data that we've already input into Spectrum here and put that in and then learn how to use Alexandria a little bit. So I can demonstrate that. Is it loaded? Tim's going to help me.
And so.
Okay. Okay. When you come onto our website, this is what you're going to find as a search engine for Alexandria. So what I would recommend is let's use Researcher first. And again, I'm new at this, so just learning it. Let's bring up Researcher. All right. One of the things I'm kind of proud of is we have a lot of World War I posters in our collection. And I've been using students from UNI to help me get those posters covered with Mylar and ready for exhibition. We're going to be doing an exhibition on World War I here, hopefully starting in August to mark the centenary of the First World War. And So I'm pretty proud of that collection. We've been working on that project for about 4 years now. So I'm going to type in World War I. Poster, use the smart search. And then it provides a photograph of what the item looks like. Right here is, will eventually be a guide or a button that will take you to a larger photographic image of the item. If you want to know details about it, now these were cataloged by UNI students with my guidance, so try to make sure everything was correct there. So you want to know something about the poster itself. It was donated to us by William Crofts Bullen, who was an English Freemason. Took a lot, I guess he really liked the Iowa Masonic Library, the Grand Lodge of Iowa. We got a lot of collections from him. All right. All right. Let's go to researcher again. Now I'm going to show you what a poster would look like. Okay, let's say you know the call number. In this case, an artifact number, but same thing as a call number. Say you knew the call number of item that you were looking for. Type that in. Tells you what it is. Then here's a link that'll show you what the poster looks like. So. Eventually, we'll be doing this with all of our museum objects as well as our books and materials. Now, we can't afford 2 different databases, one for our museum and one for our library. In the museum world, a lot of people use what's called Past Perfect as a database, which essentially sort of does the same thing as we're doing here. We just can't do that. Let's do another one. All right. Okay, again, let's say you knew what the call number of a book was. This happens to be a Prince Hall proceeding. This is from the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Virginia. Again, go to the web forms link. It shows you a PDF that we've made, actually a scanned article. We've done a scan of that book. So you could actually, it's not as good as what, it's not in the same format like Mark was showing where you can flip pages and things like that, but you can scan it down. Yes, sir.
Are your PDFs that are scanned in, are they scanned in a searchable PDF format or just a flat PDF format?
I believe they will be scanned. I think we will make them searchable. I believe that's the intent of this, to make them searchable. Right. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm kind of new to this, so.
Sure.
Let's say, because I was at the Quarry project, and I completely fantastic.
Maybe there, I could not free.
So, let's say, for example, I'm trying to get the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri to start doing this. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at 2 different systems now, because also I'm in charge of trying to create a museum too. So both of these systems, Past Perfect and the Alexander system, are two systems for cataloging information. But how would I connect my cataloging of information to George Washington Museum? So in essence, if George Washington, in essence, let's say I want to go to George Washington Museum first. I mean, to me, this is like a lot of information, but I've got to go back to people and say, hey, here's what's out there. How do we begin to connect the dots? That's what I'm looking for.
So my answer would be, when you digitize and put everything into a PDF,
Right.
it's portable. So you just take those PDFs and upload them to whatever database works. So you can share them. So if it's a PDF format that's compatible with the Luna project, which the Memorial uses,
Right.
good. If it's compatible with the system that Bill's using here at the Iowa Masonic Library, that's good too. So you're not, when you're scanning to a level of depth, and then you're OCR in it, and you're mapping out the words on each page. So that's not necessarily a universal system, but it's largely portable to different platforms that you use. So there's nothing to worry about in that regard. As long as, so for example, we've had Grand Lodges digitize proceedings in-house in their own state.
Right.
And they, as long as they digitize to our specifications, then they just send those PDFs to us and we upload them into our databases. And I would think that would be, as long as you're working with the same specs, then you just plug it in.
Okay, so now here's I'm going to keep going back. So what I hear you saying is that the Grand Lodge of Missouri would first need to say, oh, we're going to digitize our information. We need to know the specs. We're either going to digitize it ourselves, or can we come to the Grand Lodge of Iowa, or can we come to the George Washington and say, will you help us, and then we write a proposal.
Right, so again, I might listen to Bill's presentation on that, but here's my point of view about that.
Please use the mic.
Oh, sorry. I have one right here.
Remember, I'm talking to people who have absolutely no understanding of this process.
Yeah. Is the light on? Is there a light on? So, the Memorial Association would not tell a Grand Lodge how to digitize the proceedings. Some Grand Lodges choose, because it's their money, they want to keep their money in their state. And if there is a vendor or contractor in their state to digitize proceedings, that's their prerogative.
Okay.
We never get on the phone and call Grand Secretary what to do about anything, ever. But the answer is, but here's the specs you must meet. So we've had Grand Lodges digitize proceedings, and we said, no, that's not the specs. You made everything a 3/4 inch, and we use 3/8, so sorry, right? So you've got to bring it to our specs in order for it to upload it into our databases. We must apply the specifications. And that, I would think that's true with Bill and the other system, that is, as long as you are working to...
I'm going to deflect that question to Tim, who's our tech guy.
So what I'm saying is, as long as you have a conversation with us and we provide you the specifications, you digitize as you see fit. In the same way that many Grand Lodges are not even producing, sad to say, hard copies of their proceedings anymore. They just have everything on CD-ROM. Many of those are standards that we can just take those CD-ROMs and put them right into the database system. But if they're not, then we have to figure out another system.
To mention Grand Lodge of Iowa, ours is less sophisticated. If it's a PDF, we're just supposed to link to it and it'll see it. The only challenge I see in ours is to protect it so that it's not completely downloadable and printable from the PDF. That's the challenge I see. We prefer to protect the PDF so that John Doe and wherever, without permission, can't just download it and print it or publish it. And publishing, I think, is the issue rather than downloading for research or review. It's more to republish without permission. But if it's a PDF, we just link to it and it sees it. I mean, that's it.
So I think that's another issue that we can talk about again. I don't want to, but the purpose of what we're doing at the Memorial is that because proceedings are in the public domain and many Grand Lodge proceedings are being digitized by Google Books and everybody else, we're trying to make sure that Freemasons have authority over their history. But the Limit Project is set up to mean so that if you do see a paragraph or a speech that your Grand Master made, or there was a specific thing, that you should be able to copy and paste it so that you can use it. So our point of view is we want public to use the entire document to copy and paste as you see fit. So that if you had, again, if there was a particular speech that you were researching on a Grand Master and he made a speech in 1805 or 1905, you can copy and paste it close. This is a different system because they're more proprietary about that.
Right.
And the materials were valuable to them. So it's just a different point of view about how you want to make it.
Again, let me reiterate, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but the whole purpose of libraries is to disseminate information to their patrons. And we're trying to do that. Mark's trying to do that. Any library, be it public or private or Masonic or non-Masonic, that should be their priorities, is to disseminate information to their patrons. And so this is just another avenue that we have available to us. Now, we are not digitizing every book in our collection. That's not what our purpose is. Our purpose, if there's a need, we will digitize those books or those collections. But we'll only do that, if there's need for it. And then there is a charge for that digitization also on the requester's end. So that's all I have. Thank you.